Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the first chapter lecture of week 3. We are starting on chapter 10 this week, and I hope you noticed that we are only going to be covering 2 chapters instead of 3 chapters for the rest of the 2 weeks, because these 2 chapters, they're a little more complicated, but I want you to take a deep breath in. It's going to be okay. Right now we're working with interest, simple interest, and compound interest for week 3, and interest is something that we all know about. We all use in our everyday lives. It affects all of us all the time. And so I hope the practicality of it makes it a little bit easier for you. And now you can know what happens almost behind the scenes. So remember, interest is also based on percent. So I keep going back to you need to understand percent to be able to get this right. If you don't, it is not too late to come into my office. Let me give you some tutoring, however you prefer it, whether it's in my office, over the phone. In person is always best, but I really need you to get that so that you can understand the simple interest and the compound interest. So, without further ado, let us start. So what is interest? Okay, interest is the cost of using money. So if you pay interest on your car payments, on your mortgage, interest is something that if you don't have the money to spend it now, you can borrow that money and you can pay them for letting them use that money. And that is interest. So when you pay them back, not only do you have to pay the principal, which is what we call the face value or the amount of the loan, but you have to pay back the interest or like a fee for being able to borrow that money. And that fee is called interest. So maturity value is what you end up paying in total, your principal plus your interest. Okay, so remember these words. Maturity value is equal to the total of interest and principal. Your principal is the total amount that you borrowed right at the beginning, or the original amount that you owe. And the interest, of course, is the cost of borrowing the money. So let's see what this looks like. The simple interest formula is principal times rate times time, and this is the basic formula that we will use throughout this entire chapter. Now we might rearrange the formula a little bit, as you'll see in the slides coming up, but for the most part, you only need to know this formula and everything else will work out. So I hope you find this to be a little simple. Okay, simple interest is quite simple. So, John Carley borrowed $30,000 for office furniture. The loan was for 6 months at an annual interest rate of 8%. What are Jan's interests and what is Jan's interest and maturity value? So number 1, he borrowed $30,000. Okay, so that is your principal. The loan was for 6 months. That's your time. And it was at a rate of 8%, right? So that means not only do we have to pay the $30,000, we have to pay 8% of $30,000 additionally. So the maturity value will be the $30,000 plus that 8% interest, that cost or that fee, however you want to describe it. Those two put together is the maturity value. Look at what they say. The percent is an annual interest rate, and any interest rate that you get will always be annual interest rate. So you're going to get charged 8% if you were to borrow the money for 1 year. But as he says, the loan is for 6 months. So what do? Okay. So look at your formula. Your interest is equal to your principal, which is $30,000, times rate, which is 0.08. Remember what I said, you always have to convert percent to decimal to use that in any sort of equation. So the same thing, 8, you're going to move 2 places to the left to convert a percent to a decimal, and so it's going to be 0.08 times 6 over 12. Now, because the reason we're converting it from 6 over 12 is he only borrowed the money for 6 months. So why should he pay interest for 12 months? He doesn't have to, right? So now we only times it by 6 over 12 because that's how much time he used. Remember, the interest rate is for a year. and the time is stated in years. So the portion, which is 6 months, right, he only borrowed it for 6 months out of the 12. So its interest is equal to principal, which is 30,000, times rate, which is 8% or 0.08, times 6 months, which we're going to put as 6 over 12. And if you put that in your calculator, you'll get 1,200 interest. So now that means for borrowing that $30,000, he has to pay a fee of 1,200. So the maturity value is your principal plus your interest. So now at the end, the total amount, even though he borrowed $30,000, he's going to end up paying $31,200. Now some people, you know, is it good, is it bad? Well, here's the thing. To you, this is how you should ask yourself. If you did not have furniture, okay, would you be okay? Or would you be willing to pay that 1,200 extra just so that you can have this furniture for 6 months and you don't have to pay it, you don't have to buy it only in 6 months when you have the money, right? So that fee it's almost like a convenience fee, right? You get the ability to buy something now when you can't afford it right now because you might need it now and you don't have the money for it. If, however, you can do without it, then you know it's probably best to wait until you've saved up, because then you don't have to just spend $1,200 here and there for, you know, just because you were a little impatient. So that's another topic altogether, but that's a very important point on interest is it worth paying interest or not? And sometimes only you can tell. So let's go into this. Okay, another one. Jan borrowed $30,000. The loan was for 1 year at a rate of 8%. What is the interest and maturity value? Same thing, okay? The principal is $30,000. Rate converted to a decimal, 0.08. Times how much in years? It was 1 year. If you were to convert that to months, it would be 12 over 12, which, remember, you learned this in fraction, that 12 over 12 is equal to 1. So really, it doesn't make a difference if you type it out as 12 over 12 or 1 in your calculator. And because it was for 1 year at 8%, the interest was $2,400, which is exactly double the interest because now it's not 6 months anymore, it's 1 year. So the maturity value, the value he's going to end up paying in this at the end of this 1 year is $30,000 plus $2,400, which is $32,400. Again, the question for him, this is just random, is was that extra $2,400 of payment, was that worth it? Because now he has this 6 months worth of, now it's 1 year worth of furniture that he might have had to wait 1 year for. So there's two methods of calculating the simple interest and the maturity value. It can be on exact, right? How many days are there in a year? 365. And so, you know, just like we said 6 months out of 12, sometimes if you have a 90-day loan, then you convert the year to days and you say 90 divided by 365. So let's look at an example. On March 4th, Peg Carey borrowed $40,000 at 8%. Interest and principal are due on July 6th. Okay, March 4th to July 6th. How many days is that? So you'll end up counting and you'll see it is 124 days. Okay, so now your interest is equal to principal times rate times time. So principal is $40,000, that's how much they're borrowing. Rate is 8%, again, converted to your decimal, always, 0.08, times your time. How long was the loan for? And this time, because it's out of days, it's 124 divided by 365. So your interest is 1,087.12. So of course your maturity value is your principal plus your interest, which is 4,000 plus 1,087.12 cents. So that is 41,087.12 maturity value. So at the end of those 124 days, instead of paying $40,000, she ended up paying $41,087.12. But that was exact interest. Right now, we're talking about ordinary interest. No one really counts a year as 365 days in the financial business world. 1 year is actually 360 days in the bank, okay? So whenever you're doing your homework, pay attention. When they're asking you to do it in days, are they asking you to do it in exact, or are they asking you to do it in ordinary? And if it's ordinary, then you want to make sure instead of 365, it's out of 360. So same thing, same date, March 4th, borrowed $40,000 at 8%. Interest and principal are due on July 6th. Ordinary interest, 360 days. Same formula, interest is equal to principal times rate times time. So your principal is $40,000 times 0.08, it's 8%, move the decimal 2 places to the left, times 124, same number of days, divided by 360. And now you get 1,002.22 cents. So now the maturity value is 40,000 plus 1,102. I'm sorry, plus 1,102. That's right. There's a miscalculation. They forgot the 1 in the interest up top. So it's now 41,102.22 cents for the maturity value. Please note the error that they have. In the top question, they have 1,002.22 cents, but in the bottom, they have 1,102. The second one is correct. The first one is actually incorrect. So now, compare these two side by side, okay? On May 4th, Dawn Crystal borrowed $15,000 at 8%. Interest and principal are due on August 10th. How many days from May 4th to August 10th? 90 days. I'm sorry, 98 days. So principal times rate times time, it's 15,000 times 0.08 times 98 over 365 for exact interest, and times 98 over 360 for ordinary interest. And look at the slight differences. There's about $4 difference. That if you're doing it exact, it's 15,322 as a maturity value, and if you're doing it in the ordinary interest, it's 15,326.67 cents. So that's about, you know, $4.50 more, roundabout. I hope those were clear enough. But what if you don't know? What if it's not the interest that you're looking for? What if you have the interest, but there's one of the others that you don't know? Well, write these down, because we're going to go through every possible variation. Write them down so that when you do your homework, these will be right in front of you. So Tim Jarvis paid the bank $19.48 of interest. Okay, so we know what the interest is, at 9.5% for 90 days. How much did Tim borrow using the ordinary interest method? Okay, keywords. How much did Tim borrow? The question is, what is the principal? Okay, and then of course, using the ordinary interest method. Those are another keyword, ordinary interest, because that just means it's out of 360 instead of 365. So if you look at the formula that's at the top of the page, principal is equal to interest divided by rate times time. So your interest is 19.48 divided by 0.095. Remember, decimal, your percent has to be converted to a decimal before you can use it in a calculation. So 9.5 is equal to 0.095 times 90 over 360. Don't round the answer. If you have a scientific calculator, put brackets. Put parentheses, and make sure that it's calculating in the right format. And then if you put that in, plugged in really well, then you should get that the principal is $820.21, which means that Tim Jarvis borrowed $820.21, and he paid them 19.48% interest. I'm sorry, $19.48 interest, which is equal to 9.5% for 90 days. So now you just put it in your formula and you check it the other way around by doing, your principal times rate times time. So 820.21 times 0.095 times 90 over 360, and you should get 19.48. If you would have rounded it when you were going during your, the original calculation, principal is equal to interest over rate times time. If you rounded that answer incorrectly, then this check would show you because it wouldn't balance out exactly. So what happens if you have your principal in time but you don't have the rate? So say, Tim Jarvis borrowed $820.21 from a bank and he paid 19.48 for 90 days. What's the interest using ordinary interest method? So your rate is equal to interest divided by 820.21, which is your principal, times your time, which is 90 over 360. And you should get 9.5%. Again, check it out to make sure that if you were to put it in the calculation, principals times rate times time, 820.21 times 0.95 times 90.360, it should work out that your interest is 19.48. And if it does work out, it means you were correct. And of course, the last one, what if you have everything else but you don't have the time? How do you figure this out? Okay, so Tim Jarvis borrowed $820.21 from a bank. Tim's interest is 19.48 for 90 days. What rate of interest did Tim pay using ordinary interest method? Okay, so you have your interest divided by your principal times your rate, and you get 0.25. Now, what does 0.25 mean? Okay, remember, we know it's 90 days, and we know that we're using the ordinary method. So 0.25 means it's 0.25 of a year, right? So what is 0.25 of a year? Of, whenever you're calculating anything that says of, you know it's multiplication. So of a year is times a year. But because we're using ordinary interest method and we're calculating it days, we're not going to say a year is 1 year or a year is 12 months. We're calculating it in days. So a year, because it's ordinary interest, is 360 days. So 0.25 of, which is multiplication, 360, which is equal to 90 days. So again, just plug in your values and check that if you were to do the original format of the equation, which is interest is equal to PRT, principal, rate, and time, then you should get 19.48. So what happens when you you have this long-term thing and you make payments all the time? How do you know, is your payment going towards your principal or your interest? Well, there's a rule that says any payment first covers the interest, and then whatever's left of that payment goes against the principal. Now here's the thing, if you just keep paying interest, then you're just going to end up paying forever and ever, right? Because they charge interest on your principal. So when you want to pay back, you want to make sure that the principal is going down so that the overall value of the interest goes down and you can pay it off quicker. So let's see what this means. Joe Mill owes $5,000 on an 11% 90-day note. So our principal is $5,000. Our rate is 11%, and our time is 90 days, okay? On day 50, he pays $600 on the note, okay? So he owes it for 90 days, but at 50, instead of paying the $5,000, he just pays $600. He makes a payment. On day 80, Joe makes an additional $800 payment. Assume a 360-day year. What is Joe's adjusted balance after day 50 and after day 80? What does the ending balance do? There's a lot of questions there, so let's work through it step by step. So number one, how much interest does he owe? Okay, that's step number one. Calculate the interest, and we want to calculate it until day 50 because that's when he makes his first payment. So up until day 50, he's been charged $76.39 dollars. Okay, so on day 50, he makes a $600 payment. All right, of that $600, first he has to pay off the interest, which is $76.39, and whatever's left goes against the principal. So $523.61, if you look at the bottom, $523.61 is whatever he's going to pay against the principal. So now you have the principal, which is 5,000, minus 523 and 61 cents. So now the principal is only 4,476 and 39 cents. Now this is good because now the 11% is no longer on 5,000, it's now on 4,400, which means that he's going to be paying a little bit less interest. But now, remember, he's still going to make another payment on in 80 days. Now, what's the difference between 50 days and 80 days? 30 days, right? So what's the interest that he's been charged? Remember, we're not going to try to find out interest for 80 days because he's already paid off the first 50 days of interest. Okay? So now we want to know what is the interest for the that period in between those 30 days. Okay, so again, we take the new principal, which is 4,476 and 39 cents, times the rate, which is 0.11. Remember, percent convert to decimal when you're using it in a calculation, times 30 over 360, the difference between 80 and 50. And now the interest is 41.03. And he made an $800 payment. So remember, first thing comes out of that payment is the interest. So he paid $800 minus the interest, which is $758.97, and that amount that he has left of his payment, that amount is going to take away from his principal amount. So now it's 4,476, which was the new principal, minus 758, and now the new principal is 3,717 and 42 cents. Okay, so that's day 80. But now they say, what is the ending balance at 90 days, right? So now we have our new principal, which is 3,717.42 times principal times rate, 0.11, times time, which is now 10 days, right? Because we've already paid for interest up to day 80. Now we just need to pay interest from day 80 to day 90, which is 10 days. So now it's 10 over 360, which is $11.36. So the total amount that he owes on day 90 is the remainder of the principal, which is 3,717, plus your interest, which is $11.36. So now at the day now at day 90, he still owes $3,726.78. Okay, so we have to go through a couple of steps because he made a couple of payments. Now here's the thing. Okay, let's go back here. The first interest that was charged was $76.39. Now, if he wouldn't have paid $500, and if he would have just, $600, if he would have made just a $60 payment, then all of that entire $60 would have been paid to reduce the interest, right? So the $60 would have been left, would have been taken out of the interest. He wouldn't have paid anything on the principal. So that 76 and 39 cents, we would say minus 60, so it would be $16.39, and we would add that interest to the principal, and then we would charge the interest on the principal again, and then we would add it to the leftover $16 that was left. We're not going to add the 16 to the principal and then charge it on the new amount. That's compound interest, and that is what we're going to do. That's going to be due on Thursday. So I hope that made some sense. Again, if it didn't, let me know. So let's go through some examples. Okay, calculate the simple interest and the maturity value for the following problem. Remember in your homework that I need you, if the question says calculate the simple interest and maturity value, I need you to give me both answers so that I know that you know how to do both. So the question, if you just give me one, then you'll get 1 point out of the possible two. So you have a principal of $17,000, you have interest rate of 2.25%, and you have time of 18 months. Okay, 18 months is more than a year, just a heads up, because it's 12 plus some. So what is your simple interest? They've given you the answers there, but let's go through it and see how you can figure it out. Interest equals principal times rate times time. So 17,000 times 0.025, which is now which is a decimal format of the percent, times 18 over 12, because it's in months, so we know it's out of 12, so it's 18 out of 12, which by the way is an improper fraction. So 17,000 times 0.025 times 18 over 12 is 637.50 cents. That's how much interest they're going to have to pay. So that's your simple interest. That's one answer. What is the maturity value? Simple. You're just going to say maturity value is equal to principal plus interest. So 17,000 plus 637.50 cents is equal to a maturity value of 17,637.50 cents at the end of those 18 months. So let's continue with another one. You have a principal of 1,000. You have an interest rate of 8%. You borrowed March 8 and you paid June 9. Remember, look at the top. It says ordinary interest. Is that out of 360 or 365? It's out of 360 because it's ordinary. It's not exact. Okay? So the exact time is 93 days. Okay? So now we want to say principal, which is 1,000, times rate, which is 0.08, times time, which is 93 over 360, because now we're talking in days, which is equal to $20.67. Again, your maturity value is equal to your principal plus your interest, so it's $1,020.67. Okay, so now if we're using the same thing on exact interest, how would it be different? Our principal stays the same, our interest stays the same, our time stays the same. The only thing that changes in the time is instead of 1,000 times 0.08 times 93 over 360, it's 1,000 times 0.08 times 93 divided by 365, which is $20.38. Again, maturity value is equal to your principal plus your interest, which is 1,000 plus $20.38, which is $1,020.38. So, last question. Okay, what we're trying to find the missing values. We know what the principal, interest, and the interest rate and the simple interest is. We just don't know the time. Okay, so if you go back, I hope you wrote this down, I hope you listened to me, but if you didn't, here's the thing, you can still look at this circle just like we had in the percents when we had portion and base and the rate. It kind of works similarly, okay? So you don't know what your time is. So your time is equal to interest divided by principal times rate. So that's 100 divided by 400 times 0.05. And if you multiply that out, you'll get 5. So that means they paid 5% interest for 5 years on a principal of $400. So their total interest that they ended up paying was $100. How do you check this out? Okay? Interest is equal to principal times rate times time. So say your principal is 400 times rate is 5% or 0.05 times time, which is 5 years. So you can just leave it, because it's in years, just leave it at 5. So 400 times 0.05 times 5 should equal $100 to make sure that you got it right. And that was your check. So that was a really quick and simple explanation for simple interest. I hope that this is helpful to you and that you do not only, well on just typing up the summary for me. This will be very, very short, so I just want to make sure that you know exactly what the different formulas are, what is ordinary interest, what is, ordinary calculation and the exact interest calculation, and I want to know the different versions. Yes, principal interest is equal to principal times rate times time, but what if you were to mix those around? What are those formulas? What would they look like? Explain that to me in your summary and you'll get full credit. Do your homework. Hope it's easy. Remember, 10% off for every day it's late. Those are just 10% that you're throwing down the drain. If you just do it on time, you get an additional 10%. And that 10% could be the difference between a D or a C or a B, or even a B and an A in your assignment. So just have it in on time, and if you have any questions, I keep telling you, please let me know. Otherwise, we will work on this stuff on Thursday at our live lecture at 8 p.m. Central Time. I will see you guys there.